tuned to the President's Live Briefing for July 2nd. About 201 of you have registered for our briefing this afternoon. And just as a reminder, the Q&A function is available to you to ask questions that will be considered at the end of the presentations. With that, I'll turn it over to President Lemons.
Thank you, Joshunda. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. Again, happy to have Provost Nwosu and Vice President Rotolo with us again. As you know, we've been holding these briefings in order to give you some real-time information on the two really big issues that are facing our college right now, which is budget and the pandemic and our plans for the campus in the coming months. So before I go to the budget, I'd like to say just a few things about the campus, the return to the campus. Provost Nwosu will address some of this in more detail later, but I want to make a few general comments. Although we know that New York City is now moving through its phases of returning to some form of normalcy, and that there are 4 phases, we're in the 4th phase, we do not have plans to reopen the campus in a way that that word reopening might suggest. We don't have targets for how many individuals we want to bring back to campus or what percentage. Safety is our first consideration right now, and it's going to remain that. And the fewer persons we have on campus, the safer we are. Of course, we have other things we have to take into account. We have to be sure that the college is functioning as well as it can. And that may mean that some individuals will be coming to campus who haven't been coming to campus so far, faculty and staff. But again, our overriding concern and goal is to keep the number of individuals on campus to an absolute minimum, because we know that that is the safest route. CUNY is finalizing general guidelines for all of the CUNY campuses in terms of what our next steps will be in managing our campuses and having faculty, staff, and students on the campuses. Our own campus, under the direction of Vice President Rotolo, has developed a detailed plan also looking into the future and outlining how we're going to handle any changes in what we're doing right now. Once CUNY releases its plan, that plan will be modified in whatever it needs to be, way it needs to be, so that it's consistent. And then that plan will be made available. So I just want you to know that there's been a lot of ongoing and very consistent effort in working on this and thinking through what our next steps are. And of course, our information is changing all the time. And we look outside of New York State, look outside of the Northeast, and we see what's happening. And we have to be aware that what's happening out there can happen here again. And we do not want to have that happen, and we don't want to play any role in that happening. So that really is foremost in what we're thinking about doing. So now, let me turn to the budget. And before we get into looking at the structural deficit, which is a really important topic today, I want to give a little background. It's important to keep in mind that before the pandemic wreaked havoc on all and brought about this fiscal instability that the state and local governments are experiencing and the federal government, Lehman College had analyzed its financial health for both short and the long term. While we had amassed a very healthy fund balance, we knew that the large expenditures that were related to the collective bargaining agreements were coming up in the next 2 years, and so far New York State has not agreed to fund them. We determined that the best course would be to utilize that fund balance to cover those expenses rather than be forced to resort to large budget reductions in future years. Current fund balance has allowed us to rethink how we preserve our academic excellence and support scholarship and creative work in the years ahead. That's the long term of the short term. Of course, the pandemic has served to make this work much more urgent. Without federal action, New York State and the city face dire budget outlooks, and as a result, so does CUNY. If you're watching the news, you know that this, again, is something that is changing literally every day. Particularly what the Senate Republicans are thinking and what they're going to be willing to do, and very importantly, what is the timeline that they're going to adhere to as they consider what next federal actions might happen. So we're in this state of uncertainty, and we've had to construct our current budget then guided by principles that we could set out to keep our campus community healthy and safe, to maintain the integrity of our academic programs, to continue to serve as one of the borough's primary engines of opportunity. These are hugely important values to us that we have to keep coming back to. We're also committed to making strategic decisions that do take in not just the need that we have in the short term, but the long-term needs that we have to make sure that we stay in a strong position. So with that brief introduction, I would like to turn this over to Vice President Rotolo, who will again fill in some details and give us some more insight into where we are and what we're looking ahead to in terms of the budget.
Thank you, President Lemons. Good afternoon, Lehman College. It's great to be back with you again. I can't wait till we can actually be together again on campus and see each other. Before I get into the detail, I'd just like to give you a little background on this. So what is a structural deficit? Quite simply, it means that our expenditures exceed our budget or our annual revenue. Why do we have a structural deficit? Well, there have been many years where increases provided through collective bargaining have not been funded. We have basically been self-funding collective bargaining increases through the increases in tuition, through our enrollment growth, and because of over-collections of tuition from exceeding our enrollment targets. Even with employing those strategies, our deficit grows with each year and every new controller's determination or collective bargaining agreement reached. Now you can put up the slide now, Miguel, please. Another strategy the college has employed for many years is to maintain vacancies. And we've talked about the vacancy report and to delay hiring to realize savings. So what I'm going to walk you through is some scenarios. The first one is where we would have been had COVID not happened and we were actually just entering and planning, doing our budget planning for fiscal year 21. So our budget without any cuts would have been 109.6, almost $0.7 million. Our expenditures are 115.8, or actually almost $116 million. So you can see our expenditures exceed our budget by $6.2 million. That's our base structural deficit. What I haven't included in this scenario is the vacancies. We currently have $4.5 million in vacancies. Those are positions that have not been filled, that are vacant. So this is just base budget, not filling vacancies, and not having any state budget cut. If we go with a base budget, not considering state cut, and fill those vacancies, we have the same $109.7 million budget, $115.9 million expenditures, $4.5 million in vacancies that are filled, which brings our total expenditures to $120.4 million. That brings our structural deficit to $10.7 million. Now let's go to the scenario where we have the budget cut that we're anticipating from the state. Our budget allocation remains the same, a base budget of $109.7 million. We then are anticipating a 10% state budget cut. That's of $10.6 million. So that reduces our budget to $99.1 million. Our expenditures remain the same at $115.9 million. That's all of the OTPS, PS regular, part-time, adjuncts, all of our current costs. We have not included vacancies in this scenario, so we are not filling those vacancies. So that brings our deficit to $16.8 million. In the last scenario, we have our base budget of $109.7 million. We have a 10% state cut of $10.6 million, so that our total budget allocation is $99.1 million. Our expenditures are current at $116 million, plus we add into that filling the $4.5 million in vacancies. So our total expenditures at that point are $120.4 million. And that brings our structural deficit to a grand total of $21.3 million. So this is where our structural deficit comes from. This is what it has the potential to be. And it's been through very careful management over many, many years that in fact we haven't had to make the major cuts that we haven't had to make, sorry. and one of the things we also, in planning for the budget, wanted to make sure we did was not do across the board budget cuts. But this gives us an opportunity to look at and address our structural structural deficit, I apologize. And that explains the deficit. And if there's any questions, I'll answer them after everyone's gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Rene. That is very helpful and enlightening. So with the structural issues in mind, we set out to develop a budget for this fiscal year. Now, I'm proud to say that throughout this budgeting process, which involved consultations with every academic and administrative department in the college, we have kept true to our principles, as well as the process that we set out to follow at the outset. We determined the best course of action would be to plan for a 10% reduction, which is what you just saw. Again, we don't know what that will actually be. Looking at all the scenarios and starting with the governor threatening a 20% reduction for education, we decided our most prudent path would be to look at that and consider that that may be what we're having to deal with and to plan accordingly. So that was done in the face of all these uncertainties. And if I could have the next slide, Migdio can go through, again, the timeline that I have presented a number of times now in these meetings. It's modified because time is marching on. And what I've done is color-coded this a little bit. So those dates over there that are in green and crossed out, those are deadlines that actually were met. Those ones that are red and crossed out are deadlines that were not met. And among those are two which have that asterisk in front. That's dates when New York State could have announced either increases or decreases in the budget, April 30 and June 30. Neither of those has happened. And we understand that the governor is holding back on making any of those adjustments because he wants to see what the federal government is going to do in terms of another package, which is the HEROES Act. At least that passed the House. So that's why none of those dates have had any actions associated with them. Our budget year began on July 1, and that's something that isn't going to change no matter what. Usually, and in my memory always, the CUNY Board of Trustees has approved a budget by July 1, so that we have a preliminary budget to work from. But the board did not approve its budget on its in its meeting this week. In fact, was not presented with a budget because of the uncertainty, and will delay doing that until sometime in mid-August, which I have indicated there in gray because that really is not known for sure. But that's the general thinking, I think, that the board would approve a budget by for FY21 in mid-August. The reason that we have only got a budget allocation for 1 month, July, for the month of July, is that, because we don't have a board-approved budget of any kind. We will still be planning to finalize our budget in mid-August, but there's one other date, again, I have to point out, which is that December 31 is another date that is encoded in the currently approved state budget for the state budget director to be able to make adjustments in the budget based on what the revenue has been and what the projections are for the rest of the state's fiscal year. So we are not going to get away from uncertainty at all. If you know, my crystal ball is not really that great, but you know what it's telling me is that it's going to be August or September probably till we know what the Congress is going to do. And if we only know by then, I think that tells us what we will know about the state budget. So that's a timeline. What I wanted to then go on to say is that we did not achieve our 10% reduction in spending, but we did make major steps in addressing the structural deficit that VP Rotolo just went over with you. So the what it will be, we don't know, but we have at least made a very significant first step in that direction. And I am very pleased that the actions that we have taken to date are strengthening us, not only for this year, but for the years ahead. It was very important to try to reduce the impact on people, to make sure that we have courses that are available for students so their academic progress isn't interrupted, and that we're not resorting to layoffs if at all possible. And I really think we've succeeded. Much of the credit goes to the department chairs and deans who have worked very hard to create workable course schedules and to trim OTPS budgets, deferring supplies and equipment purchases and the like to minimize the impact on our staffing. Now, I'm going to turn to Provost Nwosu, who will talk a bit about the process that has guided the decisions by the chairs and deans, and also fill in, as I mentioned, more of the details around what's coming up for the fall. Provost Nwosu.
Thank you very much, President Lemons, and good afternoon, everyone. I do want to underscore the many points the President has noted here, and certainly Vice President Rotolo. As everyone recalls, when we began this process, we had a lot of assumptions. The President has talked about those assumptions and a lot of unknowns as well that we had. As you recall in the presentations that I have had and VP Rotolo and the President, one of those assumptions was a flat enrollment. We have been working extremely hard to ensure that our summer enrollment is robust as well as our fall enrollment. And we have had some significant progress in that regard. As you also recall, the other assumption was that we may not have any tuition increase. And so given all of those assumptions, and certainly the 10% the President has talked about, out of the $10.6 million deficit that we were looking at as part of our working scenario, we have really made tremendous progress. We did develop in academic affairs to guide the process a document that we titled Academic Considerations for Budget and Resource Planning. That particular document we shared, I shared with our FP&B, with a joint Senate Committee on Budget and Long Range Planning, with our Provost and Dean's Council, and many other stakeholders at the college. It's a public document. But it did provide a series of considerations that we asked the deans to utilize in terms, and the chairs in making decisions that the President just referred to. Essentially saying that we decentralize that process. And as a consequence of that decentralized approach, our deans worked very, very hard and very closely with department chairs and faculty in getting to where we wanted to be. Certainly we did not achieve the 10% because of the points that the President made, that it was important for us to continue to ensure that we have enrollment growth, that we preserve the integrity and quality of our academic programs, and that we also have opportunity to invest where we must. And so, as everyone recalls, when this virus and the hiring freeze hit the campus, we were already making progress towards new hires, and we had actually hired 17 new faculty, successfully. But we had to pause as a consequence of where we are given our funding situation. But I'm also pleased to say that even with all of that going on, just 2 days ago, the ad hoc committee on academic exception met and reviewed additional requests from our deans and our departments and made recommendation to the College Vacancy Review Committee. If that recommendation is approved, we will have additional new lines that we have approved, keeping commitment to continue to support what's happening in academic program areas. And in addition to that also, a continuing appointment of a substitute faculty. That also is a recommendation that came out 2 days ago from that committee. So if you add all of the actions taken, we're looking at 16 specific action requests that we approved 2 days ago, in addition to those 17 new lines. So there's been a commitment on the part of the college to advance the institution, advance our mission, even in spite of the challenges that we have faced. But we would not have been able to do all of this if we didn't have the discussions, the collaborations, the one-on-one meetings with VP Rotolo and Bethania, with our deans, with our chairs, with other units as well that support academic programs as well. And so the success actually goes to them. That's also the spirit in which we have been involved in the discussions around reopening. As you recall, I had sent out a document which we called guidelines for preparing for summer 2020 and for fall 2020 and spring 2021. That document has been the centerpiece of the work that we have been doing to ensure that we have a robust summer, and that we also planning given the where the virus is and given requirements placed on us by the state and the system to guide our planning. A few days ago, I think it was last week actually, we continued that discussion, and what I'm about to share with you is really an outline of a phased approach that I have been engaged with in academic affairs with our deans in preparation for a reopening for fall. Let me say this, the college is not closed. We are still offering instruction virtually, and we are providing services virtually. What's not happening is that we don't have in-person support services necessarily, and we don't have in-person instruction. But we've been open for business since spring, even with the crisis that we have been experiencing. That would not have happened without the commitment, the resilience of our students, the faculty across the institution, our staff members, public safety, everyone who has been a critical player in ensuring that we remain open and serve the needs of our students and meet the needs of our region and our community. And so what this is really doing today is to further that work. And I want to go to the next slide so you see the 4-stage approach that we have been involved with. Engaging campus stakeholders. I've talked about the process of that engagement, guided by those guidelines developed in the Dean's, Provost and Dean's Council. Dean Mills has been the key leader in developing that document. And we did establish small groups, small committees to help develop outlines and recommendations to guide further work. Some of those recommendations included additional training and workshops for faculty in preparation for summer, as well as in preparation for fall semester. And Olena's shop has been extremely hard at work in engaging faculty, as well as IT shop led by Steve Castellano with regard to how to access Blackboard and related support services in that shop. And thanks to the work that he's been doing under Vice President Bergman. So what are some of the things that have also happened? The meetings with PDC, FP&B, Cabinet, and others. and then a constant communication that we've had with the campus community. Some of these communications have also been guided by communication and guidelines provided by central office. So that's also been a key part of the work that we have been engaged in terms of how we communicate with the campus community. Stage 2, we look at the next step in terms of what we are planning now. There was an analysis done by CUNY that did suggest that if we looked at fall 2019, that the majority of our courses, if we stayed with where we are with the virus, the majority of our courses will still, be offered effectively online. And that's how this 90% idea came about. That there may be some other courses, such as lab, depending on if they're advanced lab, that we may consider moving online. And based on that analysis of the entire system, they came at the number 10%. Now, if you apply that number to our own campus, think about 15,000 students, you're looking at approximately 1,500 students. There's no way in the world we will have 1,500 students come to campus in fall. But I have given this number as a guide to look at the entire system. But the work that we have been doing with the deans and asking them to work very closely with the chairs is to simply look at those courses or sections that you believe, given the experience of spring semester, that we can move as part of our reopening in person for fall 2020, that we can offer in person on campus. That's the work that they have been doing. And they were given till Wednesday next week to provide final information on that. And I've asked the deans to ensure that that happens. The president has mentioned this very much, that our goal is not really to have as many folks on campus as possible, given where we are with the virus, but to ensure that the safety of our campus community is paramount in decisions or recommendations we make with regard to in-person presence on campus. And whilst they're thinking of their plans to include a plan for international students, many of those international students are not physically here. Some of them are actually out of the country. And so they may still not be able, if we had to have them physically on campus, they're not able to fly back to participate in that in-person experience. So keep that in mind. And also keep in mind students with disabilities. That was also an issue we experienced during spring. And to include IT needs, library and other related support services in their thinking of those few classes, very few classes, that they believe very strongly that we might be able to offer on campus. The next stage of this, of course, is the third one, which is to keep in mind the guidelines that the state has provided. And there's a checklist that I sent to the deans to use as a checklist to make sure that they place into very strong consideration safety requirements, health requirements, as indicated by the state, and of course indicated by our facilities unit under VP Rotolo. What I've also asked our deans, even if you've recommended in a department that we offer one course or two sections as in-person for fall, what happens if there is an emergency or a resurgence of the virus? What plan do you have for those? If you have 25 students in that class and there's one case, how do you deal with that? And so think very, very carefully of the plan you are submitting and think of a contingency plan as part of that plan in the event we have a resurgence of the virus. We're also talking about entering the data in CUNY first. And so that's why it was important for us to have a timeline for submitting those few courses that they will be recommending if at all they have them. In the instance that a department does not have a course, that's okay. The goal is not to get to 10%. The goal is to stay as minimally as possible with online instruction, as opposed to wanting to come to campus for in-person instruction. Again, the safety of our students, our campus community ought to be paramount in that planning. My expectation is that there will be very, very few of those courses for fall if that actually happens. Based on that information we gather from our school deans, then we will develop a communication plan. CUNY has asked us to submit a campus plan, a college plan, and Rene and I, VP Rotolo and I will work together to complete that plan and then submit to CUNY accordingly. So that would be the final thing. Once we get the approval of our central office, we will have a plan. Again, it's a contingent plan because we have no idea how this virus will manifest itself. And then the final stage, of course, is stage 4, which is a fall opening, and we return to campus August 26th. So that's really a summary, a brief overview of the framework that our school deans are using, including the Office of Academic Programs for our early age courses. They are using this framework in developing the in-person arrangement for fall 2020. Again, underscoring as few as possible, and where you don't have to, you don't have to. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Provost. That was really a great presentation, and thank you to you and to everyone else that you've worked with on this plan. This is clearly a lot of effort has gone into this to make it sound and to give us a basis that we can really use. I wanted to come back to something that has come up this week. There's been a lot of discussion in recent days about the non-reappointment of adjunct faculty members, and I'd like to just clarify a little bit about that. We've worked to retain adjunct faculty members, particularly those who have health insurance because of their working at CUNY. That was a priority as we began, and it continued to be a priority, and it's been a priority of the chancellors as well. I've heard that directly from the chancellor on numerous occasions. We got a list from CUNY HR of all of the part-time faculty members who were receiving health insurance because of their work as adjunct faculty members. And we have, through the provost, through the deans, through the chairs, who have really done the lion's share of this work, have really paid attention to that through the process. And they've done a fantastic job of trying to be sure that when course sections are being assigned, that they're done in a way that, if possible, cannot jeopardize the health insurance of faculty members. There has been a number circulated in recent days that there are 9 adjunct faculty members not reappointed for the fall who would lose their health insurance. I'm happy to say that information is incorrect. We've looked at this carefully. Actually, 5 of those have been reappointed. 2 declined their appointments. Another has not been teaching adjunct at Lehman since 2017, and another moved away. So from our best information at this moment, we think that no Lehman adjunct faculty members who are currently receiving health insurance through CUNY teaching are losing it. Again, the credit goes to the deans and the chairs who paid close attention to this and worked so strategically to arrive at that result. Another point of information that has been circulated and it's been talked about, I've commented on it in the past in these sessions, but I would just return to it briefly. And that is what's the role of the CARES Act, and can't that help to retain faculty members who have not been reappointed? This is irregardless of whether health insurance is at stake or not. To be very clear, that's not a possible solution. There are very strict guidelines governing how the CARES Act funding is used. If we could get this, if you look at this slide, this is really the framework that we are using as an entire university, as CUNY, for that part of the CARES Act that's being allocated to campus. Remember, 118 million has all been already distributed to students across the university. Initially, not all of it could be because students had not had eligibility, but that number has gone way down, and I think there's only another 10 or so million that has yet to be distributed, but will be directly to students. These are the guidelines for that other 118 million plus 14 million that was designated because CUNY has a number of either minority serving institutions or Hispanic serving institutions, of which Lehman is both. So some of those funds, as approved by the state, can be used for student financial assistance and emergency grants. So that would be in addition to what's already been distributed. Faculty, staff, and student professional development for online education is another important piece that really is allowing us to function, that can be funded through the CARES Act. Replacing the tuition and fees that were reimbursed by the colleges to students is part of what's allowable. And also lost revenue that is directly related to COVID-19. And then health and wellness services that we're not currently providing, but we've added because of the pandemic. IT investments for distance learning, student laptops, software, all the Zoom licenses that we've had, faculty and staff computers and software, all related to being able to go into distance education mode. Then there's another amount which actually will follow and be expended in these same categories, but will be under the direct control of each campus. About 30% of the total 132 million will be distributed directly by campuses. But again, it has to meet these criteria that are listed above. It has to fall into one of these categories. So that, I put that up just again to clarify what we can and cannot do with those funds. But I want, again, just to emphasize that, you know, we have tried very hard to make sure that we do retain the part-time faculty members that we can. And one of the ways that we're doing that, which we actually can do, and it's helped indirectly by CARES Act funding, is that by providing this student support, for instance, by supporting online education, we are actually enabling students to be able to enroll. And when students enroll, we offer classes. And when we offer classes, that's when we have the need to hire more part-time faculty members. So indirectly, there is a benefit that's coming from the CARES Act that is really impacting the hiring of adjunct faculty, and that's through its impact on enrollment. As we've seen, for the summer is higher than it was last summer, and for the fall, it's still looking quite promising. So I want to finish with that, with just saying that hiring adjunct faculty members, there are many factors involved in that. But right now, here are some that have been important and have really impacted these numbers. We have a record number of full-time faculty members who were on fellowship leaves the past year will be returning to teach this fall. As the Provost mentioned, there are 17 new faculty hires coming this fall. We've reappointed the substitute faculty that currently are substitute faculty for the fall. And I want to just remind you that one of our longstanding goals, and the reason that we have tried very hard, for instance, to hire new faculty, is that we feel that the ratio of full-time to part-time faculty members, which is around 60-40 now, could be improved, and that we could have a higher ratio of full-time to part-time faculty members teaching students, and that would really represent an improvement for the college and for students. And we have done that. We've worked at that. And particularly important, I think, is a number of part-time faculty members have now been hired into full-time positions as we've worked at doing that. So all of these are dynamics that are at play when it comes to appointing faculty members on any given term, and for this fall in particular. So far, we have appointed around 680 adjunct faculty members for the fall. So that's a significant number. So with that, I think we'll turn to the questions that have come in. And yeah, I don't know, Joshunda, if you want to add any others in there, but I will go to a couple and probably going to toss them right away to VP Rotolo. What's the difference between a structural deficit and a normal deficit? That is a great question.
It is a great question. So structural deficits are ongoing. They're not caused by any short-term, decrease in revenue, but it's something that consistently goes on that is not made up because your budget allocation is less than your expenditures. So it's not like a cyclical deficit where you'll know you recover it from it in the next year or two.
Great. So I guess that in a way, what we're facing with the COVID-19 financial crisis would be more like a normal deficit situation.
Correct. It would be more like a normal deficit. It's a one-time unexpected thing that you will quickly recover from.
Great. And then here's another one that I think is really, and I'm going to again toss this one back to you, Rene. So since all four scenarios that you showed show that there's a deficit, how can we even operate?
Well, actually, and in all of the budget presentations that I've been involved with to college governance as well, we talk about this often. We have been able to fund our deficit through our annual enrollment growth, through our really pursuing collection of all the monies that are due us and over collecting above what is our revenue target. So we have been literally self-funding through these mechanisms our deficit, and also through managing vacancies. So we'll hold some positions open in order to save the funding. So we have been managing. What makes it more complicated this year is the expected decrease in our budget. That makes it much more complicated because, in fact, if you look, the decrease or the reduction in our budget almost equals our structural deficit. And in addition to that, early on, we had talked about the best case scenario would be flat enrollment growth. Now, with flat enrollment growth, we're not over-enrolling, we're not over-collecting, so we're not receiving additional funds to supplement our revenue. So we've been filling the deficit ourselves, the college, through our actions.
And then is it fair to say that when we look at what looks like a minimum $6 million shortfall in this coming fiscal year, we're not assuming that we can do that same thing, that we can fill it with tuition over collection because of enrollments, that we really will use some of our fund balance, a significant piece for that, right?
Right. And if we are fortunate enough to exceed enrollment projections slightly, in other words, if we're able to, say, increase by 1%, that will then reduce the amount of our fund balance that we'll have to put to make up the deficit. So that's a win-win for us. But right now we're still tracking flat enrollment, so we're pretty much in the scenario we had planned for and budgeted for in our planning to this point.
So let me play the devil's advocate here on this one and throw you another tough question. So let's say that, your second scenario, the one, I guess it was the third scenario.
The third scenario.
That had a state reduction of 10%. And of course, it carried forward the structural deficit. So what will we do in that case? If we have, we think we have probably a fund balance now of around 13 million, I believe.
Correct.
So that's not, even if we used all of that, that wouldn't be enough to cover that, that situation, right? So what would we be looking at then?
Well, it's actually exactly what we did and what you described that we did and what the provost described that we did. We worked very closely in developing a budget this year with the departments. And everyone took we started with a zero-based budget approach. So everybody starts from zero and lets us know what the bare minimum they need to be able to operate successfully this year will be. And as you stated, the departments did incredible in the reduction. They met our goal for reductions in OTPS. It was a little more difficult staffing side for the temp and part-time people because people everyone felt very strong to try to save jobs as much as possible. So what we need to do is we need to reduce our spending. And that's what we did through our budget planning scenario. We reduced our spending. So what you're not seeing in these views of the budget are our savings that we're projecting that we're going to have. And that has not been included because we were not talking about an overall budget plan, but just showing purely what our structural deficit is and what we've been carrying and what continues year after year after year and continues to increase year after year.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So another question here, given the budget situation, will we need to furlough staff during the academic year? And I think that what we've been trying to say and to show is that our plan is to not have to do that, that we are really trying very hard to do this in a way that we won't be faced with that kind of a situation. That's happened at a number of other CUNY colleges already, and that's a very tough situation, but that's our goal is to avoid that.
Great. Looks like we have about 14 minutes left, but we can probably end early if there are no additional questions. There is one more that's come up. Has the break-even enrollment per class changed? In other words, how many students are needed in each class for it to remain on the schedule given our financial challenges?
Provost, I think maybe you are in the best position to answer this question.
As of yesterday, we're tracking well on both fronts, summer enrollment, and we did pretty well with the first session. So far with the second session, we're tracking well based on the report I received from VP Sarmiento. We're also tracking well compared to where we were last year to where we are this year. There's a 1% increase in terms of the enrollment. Whether we sustain that is anybody's guess, but the number of strategies and discussions we're already having with one I had today with VP Rotolo, the additional conversations we are having to continue to track and make adjustments as best as possible, including adjustments in adding courses where we see a demand, and we're tracking those carefully, working very closely again, enrollment management with chairs, department chairs, with the deans to see where those demands are, and then we add classes as best as we can. So this has been a fairly strong surgical approach, watching our numbers and then seeing what we can do to encourage enrollment. We've also been looking at even payment and transactions, and there are decisions that we're making along those lines in terms of cancellations and to minimize the effect of the cancellations on courses students have already enrolled in when they haven't made the payment, whilst also mindful that we don't want to harm our ability to sustain ourselves. So it's a balancing act in that regard. So that work is going on already between all of our various units and our department chairs and deans.
Can I add to that also that as part of our budget planning this year, we worked very closely with enrollment management to look at what they were using to determine the break-even point for classes. And what we realized is that it was based on very, very old data that did not take into account the current collective bargaining agreement, actually didn't take into account the last collective bargaining agreement and the current collective bargaining agreement. It did not take into account many of our increased costs over the years. So we took another look at it and we did a recalculation and we looked at what that break-even point would be. And there were a number of different ones based on the type of course and what was involved in it. But yes, we have done a relook at that and we have made some changes to that.
So Provost, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my take on the approach that you're using is that there's not a specific cutoff, right? There are a lot of factors that go into deciding what numbers are needed in a class section for it to run, right?
That is correct. And again, that's a decision that I have left with the deans and certainly with enrollment management to make the case. And it is possible that a class that has a low enrollment threshold could run if that's a bottleneck course to the extent that students need that course in order to graduate. But then we make up that very low enrolled class from another area where we could have actually a margin. And so it's so much that goes into making a determination to say, oh, well, because you are this particular threshold, then the course, it doesn't work that way. It's a lot of thinking and that goes into making that decision. And then you also ask question, is this a course that has multiple sections? If it's a course that has multiple sections and the other sections already have met the threshold, then do you leave that one that is low enrolled? And then you ask the question, that one that is low enrolled, could you actually add that to the other courses? So you could actually use that course as a placeholder for another course where there is a greater demand. And then you're also looking at the budget situation as well. So it's a lot of calculations and thinking and thought that goes into this when department chairs make those determinations, when chairs make them. And even in our early age courses, those kinds of thinking also take place with our associate provost and the folks who manage that particular shop to ensure that students who are coming in terms of our general education courses, their needs are met as well. So it's so many things that we take into account.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So there's a question, and I was planning to close with this anyway, so I think maybe this will segue us into the end of our session. But the question is about the Presidential Task Force on campus climate, yes, and inclusion. And I mentioned that last week. And so what I wanted to tell you is that almost all the members of this task force have agreed to serve. We're still waiting to hear from a couple of potential members. So the task force is almost set, and the first task force meeting will be in mid-August. It's, as you know, mid-July. It's a little hard to get work done when we have faculty on leave through the summer. But we will at least have one meeting to get it started, get a schedule set, and to get that group started thinking about what it will be doing. I think we all feel that this is really urgent. It's been timely for some time, but now it's gained a new sense of urgency. So that is moving along quickly. And I will be meeting with that group to give them a charge, and we'll be expecting that we will see some specific recommendations coming from that group in the fall. We'll see how early that can happen, but certainly we expect to see some things, and so that as we move into the fall term and into the next academic year, we have a sense that we are really taking a hold of these issues and that we're beginning to outline and take the steps that we need to take as a campus. And with that, I don't think we have any other questions. So I think that we're probably ready to close this session. Again, thanks so much, Provost Nwosu, Vice President Rotolo, Joshunda, as always, for organizing us. Migdio for making sure that everything works. And thanks to everyone for attending this afternoon. Have a great 4th of July holiday. Do it safely, but enjoy it. I'm planning to.
Thank you.
See you all next week.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.